All right, we're 7:02, so we'll get going for tonight. Thank you everyone for joining us for the first event of our signature learning series focusing on equity, diversity, and inclusion. The introduction to EDI, understanding equity, diversity, and inclusion in pharmacy. My name is Jen Belcher. I'm the Vice President of Strategic Initiatives and Member Relations with the Ontario Pharmacists Association. And I'm really pleased to be here to introduce the signature learning series to you because at OPA, we have a commitment to ensuring that not only do we reflect the principles of EDI within our own organization, but that we provide the tools and resources that pharmacy professionals need to succeed and thrive in their daily lives and within their profession. And we know that EDI is a very topical issue right now, and learning is really a lifelong commitment in this space. Things evolve and change, and as we learn and grow as a society, there will be new things that we need to learn and take on in order to really embrace the concepts of EDI in how we relate with others, whether it be in our personal lives or in our professional lives with colleagues, other healthcare professionals, and with our patients themselves. So we're really excited to kick this off. This will be a much longer signature learning series than you're used to with us, and it will cover a wide variety of topics, but really take the pharmacy lens and be more tailored to you, so you can see how this applies to your practice and to your life. So as we get going, I'd like to start with a land acknowledgement. So we acknowledge that the land we're meeting on virtually, but as OPA is located within Toronto, is the traditional territory of many nations, including the Mississaugas of the Credit, the Anishinaabeg, the Chippewa, the Haudenosaunee, and the Wendat peoples. And it's now home to many diverse First Nations, Inuit, and Métis people. We also acknowledge that Toronto is covered by Treaty 13 with the Mississaugas of the Credit. So I'd like to introduce our speakers for the evening. We have a really fantastic session for you, and I'm excited to introduce Ashka Patel, who wears a wide variety of hats, but including this focus on EDI, where she has brought a podcast called Diverse Conversations through to the pharmacy world. And So Ash is a pharmacist, an entrepreneur, and a patient advocate, and a thought leader, of course, in healthcare. She completed her Bachelor of Pharmacy from the University of Waterloo in 2012 and went back just the same to complete her Doctor of Pharmacy degree in 2016. Since then, she's worked in community, hospital, government, and home care settings, creating new roles for pharmacist involvement within our healthcare system. She recently launched her entrepreneurial venture, providing healthcare consulting while joining a digital health venture as a startup advisor. So welcome, Ashka. We're really excited to have you lead this conversation with us here today. And joining Ashka will be Siva Sivapalan. And many of you know Siva. He's a community pharmacist and primary care pharmacist at the Hamilton Family Health Team. Both roles involve the depth of diabetes education, and he's writing his CDE refresher tomorrow, so wish him luck. He's practiced just over 14 years in Canada and the UK in hospital, community, and primary care practice. We also have Jefferson Darrell, and Jefferson's an accomplished marketing, communications, and change management professional with more than 15 years of brand strategy expertise, generating earned and owned media using both traditional and digital channels. In the DEI space, Jefferson has helped create the Diversity, Inclusion, Anti-Racism Action Team at the Ontario Science Centre, represented them in the DEI committee with the Canadian Association of Science Centres, and led them in the world's first Pride and STEM Day on July 5th, 2018. Jefferson's has been recognized by Canada's LGBTQ plus Chamber of Commerce with the 2021 Business Advocate of the Year Award. So welcome everyone, and Ashka, I will turn this over to you to get the ball rolling here.
Awesome, thanks so much, Jen. Good evening, everyone, and welcome to everyone who's joining us in this conversation. It's a pleasure to be having this conversation, and what an honor to be one of the first ones to kind of take this up and kind of get us walking. As we'll go through the session today, really the goal is we want to have more of a tip of the iceberg, trying to stand at the tip of the iceberg and trying to understand, where do we go from here, and how do we learn in this journey, which and these concepts, which may be fairly new to some of us or most of us. Diversity in healthcare is not a new term. We are all very familiar with the diverse patients that we work with, the diverse communities that we work with, Canada being such a diverse nation. But it's also important for us to understand, how can we move forward with this diversity and make sure that we're striving for more inclusive and equitable healthcare. And that's where our dialogue today would be focused on, is, how do we understand these terms? How do we create that awareness and that empathy that is required to take this work forward? And that I'm very, very grateful and actually looking forward to this conversation with both Siva and Jefferson. Without further ado, I think one of the first topic of discussion as we were planning out this session was, what is the right acronym? Is it EDI? Is it DEI? How do we go from, what is the best way to say this? And lo and behold, we had a conversation about it. OPA, based on the trainings that they've received and the conversations they've had, EDI is the preferred way of addressing it organizationally for OPA. And that's just because, diversity already exists from a representation point of view. But equity is where we need to do the work to achieve those system level changes. And equity is what needs to be embedded into the system to bring, that inclusivity that we're all trying to work towards. However, when we had this conversation with Jefferson, you being the expert of, with the EDI, DEI expert, what is the right acronym? Where do we go from here? Tell us about that, please.
Personally, from what you've just described, sorry, thank you, Ashka, first and foremost. From what you've just described, I mean, it means different things to different people. Right. Frankly, there are countless acronyms. I don't know if you're familiar with the IDEA acronym or the JEDI acronym. IDEA is inclusion, diversity, equity, and accessibility. JEDI stands for, I call my consultants Jedi consultants, mainly because he's a Star Wars fan. But I got that right, Star Wars, right? Yeah, yes. Star Wars. But JEDI stands for justice, equity, decolonization, and inclusion. My personal pet peeve, I'll be honest, I find language is important in this space. It is. Right. But one thing I do find is sometimes we can get so bogged down in the language that it will prevent us from doing the work. And the way you framed it from OPA's perspective is in, you know what? We're a very diverse organization. We're a diverse profession. And really the issue speaks to equity. The example I'm going to use there is, frankly, many organizations, you're right, many organizations are indeed diverse. Mm-hmm. The challenge, though, speaks with equity. What we often say in the D&I space is many organizations, when you look at their hierarchy, that's another discussion. When you look at their hierarchy, it often looks like a latte, or as my friends across the pond in the UK say, a pint of Guinness, very dark at the bottom and light at the top. So from that lens, it sounds like OPA wants to focus more on the equity piece, and that's fine. I mean, there's the B in this whole thing, belonging, that other organizations focus on as well. And they might say EDIB, for example.
Thank you. Thank you for that, Jefferson. And I think, as you already mentioned, I think the goal is just to be aware of what are these acronyms and what do they stand for, and also to understand, what is the purpose behind them. And I think we can choose what we resonate towards, or the work that, is where we address or have a gap that we want to address, and then we work towards that. With that in mind, I would like to, welcome the audience and start off our poll as we are having this discussion, or we continue to have this discussion. It's around, what is EDI? How do you rate your understanding of these terms? Would you rate your very good, acceptable, poor, or very poor? And, this is a safe space. One of the things that I did forget to mention as we started this conversation was, this is one of the many conversations we'll be having in this on this topic. And obviously, there's a lot of, perspectives that are currently not present at this table. But we are, as we move forward with these conversations, we want to make sure that we open those doors and make sure that we hear from those perspectives, and making sure that we incorporate them into our profession and in patient care, and as we're trying to achieve that. While everyone's trying to get these polls completed, I did want you to kind of take a moment and think about this image. This is one of those images that's very commonly associated with equity. And then, usually our understanding of equity is this. I think everyone has almost responded, so I will, close the poll in about 10 seconds. But it seems like right now we have a mix on polls from good to acceptable to poor. And so good and poor are the leaders right now. Good, acceptable, and poor are the leaders. So I will post a poll at this time. Thank you everyone for voting. So this is the image of equity that's very commonly used when we're speaking of equity. However, Jefferson has a different view on this. Jefferson, I'm going to pick on you again because this is something you really intrigued me when we had this discussion, and I would love to share that with the audience today as well.
I used to personally, I actually used to use this image as well to demonstrate the difference between equality versus equity. And so through my own OPA, the ICA, the Inclusion Allies, IAC rather, Inclusion Allies Coalition, it's OPA for people in the D&I space, we got into a very interesting discussion about this image. And when you look at the image on the left in terms of, well, frankly, both sides with respect to equality and equity, what it fails to recognize is it's making an assumption that we're all starting from the same level, the same level playing space. And let's be frank, we aren't. I mean, I don't know how many people are in this group, but let's assume just based on statistics, 50% or 52% are women. I'm sure all the women in the audience are like, yeah, I wouldn't say I started at the same level as the men in the room have. And so that's, I've been sort of migrated to a different image that I've been using to explain the difference between equality versus equity. In a nutshell, this is it here. When we think of equality, everybody gets the same. We treat everybody the same. Versus when we think of equity, we look to see what different people need and accommodate them for it based on their needs. So in this picture, for example, with equality, everybody, tall, child, average, person in a wheelchair, they all get the same bike, which in this case works for one person. Mm. Equity would mean, okay, based on the person in the wheelchair, maybe they need, I forget what that's called, but a bike where you're pumping with your hands versus your legs. The taller person gets a taller bike. The child gets a child's bike. So everyone is getting what they need. So now everybody is treated from an equitable lens versus an equality lens.
Got it. Thank you very much for that. And I think this is one of those formal definitions of equity. But if you were to, I look to both you and Siva at this point in time to kind of share some of your experiences, I guess, around equity and just your understanding about this. Siva, maybe I'll pick on you at this point. Kind of just share with us, what is your understanding of equity, and if you have any experiences to share.
Yeah, no, thank you so much. It's great to be with you guys. Very kind introduction by Jen and yourself. Equitable. So I think equitable is related to diversity, and I think as you defined if we're going to be truly equitable, then we need to appreciate diversity, and that's how we can ensure that the policies, practices, and attitudes that we convey are fair and equitable. So that's what it means to me. It means that we relate it to diversity and we appreciate diversity. So that's what it means to me. If that makes any sense.
It does. Thank you. And Jefferson, I know you kind of already spoke about this, but if you were to kind of wrap it up into a nutshell, what would be equity for you?
So an example, to put it in a workplace context, I apologize, it's not necessarily a pharmacy context, or maybe it is. Actually, it could be a pharmacy context. A lot of times workplaces will have, what's the word I'm looking for here? Why am I blanking on this? Dress codes.
Yes. And
often the language you'll see is professional attire at your manager's discretion. Between, say, the four of us on the screen right now, we may all have very different views of what professional attire means. And often for racialized peoples especially, professional attire, I'm going to be more specific, Black people's. The way our hair naturally grows out of our heads, because it's not sort of straight and what's the word I'm looking for, flowy. It's, kinky and curly and kind of stands straight up at times. Some people don't necessarily consider that professional. Here's a classic example. My sister, she uses sister locks, which is in a nutshell, very fine. It's like dreadlocks, but fine dreadlocks, very fine. She wears her hair like that. She keeps in a ponytail sometimes. In the back of her head, or tied up as a bun. Sometimes she's concerned in the workplace, will people view her hairdo as professional? Whereas when she's around Black folk, they're like, oh, it's a very professional look. Because it's not like they're just sort of coming down and she's just it's like, no, she'll style it or what have you. But it just doesn't look like say, a white person's hair, for example. So that's another example when we talk about equity versus equality. So we're treating everybody, air quotes, the same, but can we actually treat everybody the same? Because the way my hair grows out of my head might be different from the way your hair grows out of your head. So who's to say mine is less professional? I mean, funny I'm talking about hair. Who's to say mine is less professional? So
No judgment.
equity versus equality.
Thank you. Thank you for that, Jefferson. And you know, completely relatable, actually. That was something I was thinking about today as well, was, you know, dress code and you know, just what we deem to be professional or appropriate. But lately I have noticed, like, you know, workplaces are becoming more inclusive, or, you know, trying to become more inclusive by allowing that traditional attire. At least, you know, the workplaces that I have been to in the recent past have allowed for that. So that's great. Siva, any examples on your end?
Yeah, I think we should go to the next slide. But this is a case I just wanted to share with you. So again, guys, I'm not an expert on EDI. I'm just going to share a perspective as an IPG, as an immigrant, and importantly as a pharmacy professional. So this happened in community practice during the pandemic. We saw all sorts of stuff as pharmacy professionals, right? In this instance, I had a Hispanic patient come in. This was actually their first COVID vaccine. They were 72 years old, so a vulnerable member of the community. They were undocumented migrant, and their caregiver approaches me, and their caregiver obviously can speak English well, and they facilitate the interaction. So we proceed with trying to provide the immunization to the patient, and you know, we asked for the health card, and they said they can't provide one. And obviously, to cut a long story short, I essentially refused the immunization, not because I don't want to immunize the patient, but I feel that I can't. I feel that it's beyond my capabilities to do so, and things escalate really fast. The caregiver starts filming me with their phone, and it's just a very, very heated encounter. Luckily, right, and this is just coincidental, a third-year UFT student was practicing with me, and she spoke Spanish. And she started speaking Spanish. Didn't know what she was saying to the caregiver or the patient, but it just diffused the whole situation. So it's just an example where I know language, we can't always help the kind of provision of service in terms of language that we can give to our patients, but it's an example where it can be very, very useful in providing equitable care. It's about being current in your knowledge as pharmacy professionals, which can avoid an emotionally charged situation, and can also avoid suboptimal or even denial of care in this instance. So I think in this situation, what I learned is that CPD is fundamental to equity in care, continuing professional development. I'll give another example. Those infographics that Whole Health provided on Indigenous care, that overcame so much ignorance to the kind of care that we can provide in a pharmacy setting. All those infographics from the University of Waterloo about COVID vaccines and treatments. Access and easy to understand resources that are accessible, it's really fundamental to providing equitable care. That's my perspective.
Thank you, Siva. I think you know, just if I were to wrap this up, like, it really is talking about, you know, how equity is, as Jefferson mentioned, like, you know, we're all not starting from the same level playing field, and that became very evident with this example that you just shared with us, right, where this would have, receiving COVID vaccine in pharmacy would have been something what we consider a normal thing, like anyone would be able to do, right? But it didn't happen. This person unfortunately fell through the gaps of policy, and you know, we're at a disadvantage. Thank you very much for sharing that. And I know it's not easy to share these kind of examples because you're truly being vulnerable here, and I really appreciate that. And you know, I just want to make sure that we recognize that this is a very safe space where we are all choosing to be vulnerable to share our experiences and examples. And you know, just a case in point, you know, the way I see equity, one of the things that I always think about is, you know, the gender wage gap. Being a woman, you know, this is something that I've always thought about, and you know, we have data to show that it still continues to exist. Canadian Women's Foundation, as of December 2022, Canadian women were making 89 cents to every dollar a Canadian man was making. This is actually an improvement. So, you know, this has improved over the past few years. However, based on, you know, Canadian Women's Foundation's the analysis that they do, they assume that for gender equity to be achieved in Canada, it would take another 267 years to bridge that 11-cent gap. And now if we were to compare pharmacy data, because we are pharmacy professionals at the end of the day, OPA did a wage and benefits survey just last year in November as well, so November 2022, and they found similar statistics where men or male pharmacists or pharmacy professionals are making higher median and hourly salaries compared to women pharmacy professionals. And here we're talking median salary difference of men making about 112 to women making about 103, and an hourly pay of men making about $50 an hour and women making 47. So we are actually seeing a $3 difference between the genders. And this is, again, this is based on data that was collected. And I'm really grateful that this data collection has started, and hopeful that as we move into the future, we'll start to see this gap being bridged and being closed, if possible, as soon as possible. With that, we'll move into diversity because this is what we were talking about initially. So we start with equity, but we also want to recognize diversity because this world has become pretty much a global melting pot. It's become a global village where we're all kind of migrating. We have the flexibility for most of us. We have that flexibility to travel and stay where we want to in this world. And with that, I think I want to pass it over to Jefferson again to kind of help us walk us through diversity. And if you can kind of share with us, what is diversity? What does that mean? And from as an EDI expert, how do you see diversity play out in healthcare?
I mean, at the end of the day, diversity is actually the simplest letter in this acronym. My background's marketing, so I'm going to put it in marketing terms, which I think you can understand as well. It's demographics. Are you male? Are you female? Are you, Caucasian? Are you Black? Are you South Asian? Are you East Asian? Are you able-bodied? Are you on the disability spectrum, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera? But one thing I find when we start in this space is, like, people say, oh, Siva, you're the diversity hire. Like, that phrase, for example, is very misleading. And number one, it's incorrect, and it's very misleading. Individuals themselves are not diverse. Groups of people can be diverse for various different reasons, but individuals themselves are not diverse. When people say phrases like, oh, you're the diversity hire, I mean, I'm not going to get into it here unless you want me to, but there are reasons why that, frankly, phrases like that are simply, all they're really doing is upholding white supremacy at this point. Because it's negating the fact of recognizing people for their diversity, for their differences.
Thank you, Jefferson. And Siva?
Yeah, I've got to agree with Jefferson on that one. My perspective is that I completely agree that, diversity to me personally means the depth of recognizing and respecting, like you said, the perspectives of different people, and in these examples, visible and non-visible traits. So I think the effort and depth that we go into will determine how diverse we are, whether it's as a profession or as a society. So I think we really need a deep understanding of the differences to utilize it effectively.
May I add to that?
Yes, please.
One of the examples I use, so I used to volunteer with the Black Coalition for AIDS Prevention. It's an HIV/AIDS awareness organization here in Toronto. And I was asked to join to take on their, basically head up their funding development committee. And in it, there are about 8 of us on the committee. We're all guys. When I say that, we're all cisgendered, males, Black, right down to shaved heads and goatees. So at its, I love sharing the story because often when people, I'm going to be blunt here, white people, frankly, when they think of diversity, they just don't think, oh, we're not included in that. And it's like, and here's a great example. Here you have a group of Black cisgendered gay men, all of us of a certain age, certain socioeconomic income level. And I remember the executive director all coming with all these ideas to, get the word out about this new program around the spread of HIV/AIDS in ACB, African, Caribbean, and Black communities. And he said to us, you know what? These are all really great ideas. However, they all speak to other Black gay men. The fastest growing rates of HIV right now in the city of Toronto is heterosexual Black women. Which one of these ideas speaks to them? And we all looked at it, we're like, none of them. And then he said to me, Jefferson, my challenge to you as you're heading up this committee is diversify this committee. And we need to center, said to us, we are the Black Coalition for AIDS Prevention. Blackness needs to be first and foremost in everything we do. Gender, sexual orientation, that will come, and intersectionality, that'll come along with it. But because we are focused on ACB communities, African Caribbean and Black communities, that's where we need to focus our efforts. Anyways, net, jump to 2 years later. There are about 12 people on the committee now, 6 guys, 2 of them actually had hair, 2 were straight. We had a straight Black woman, a trans woman, and suddenly the argument and the discussion was, do we call ourselves African, Caribbean, or Black? And I was like, this is great. And the executive director was upset still. And I said, what's the problem? He's like, well, we're still arguing. I said, Shannon, you told me 2 years ago the focus needs to be on Blackness and to diversify this committee. That is now what's happened.
Right.
That's why I like sharing that story around diversity, because often I find people think it's just man, male, female, or white and BIPOC, if you will, Black, Indigenous, and people of color. Whereas, I mean, different groups, like, frankly, diversity right here. From an OPA lens, I mean, I'm not a pharmacist, whereas I'm surrounded by 3 other pharmacists.
Exactly. That's true. I mean, and, I to kind of concur to you, because, before I kind of delved myself into this area of subject area, like, I was ignorant myself. Like, for me, diversity was basically those physical differences that exist, or like, the where you come from in this part of the world, and which part of the world do you come from. Like, that's really what my understanding, or that my limited understanding of diversity was, until I started, learning and understanding, how diversity is not just that, and it's so much more. And that intersectionality, even as we speak, there's so many different perspectives that, we do not have at this table today. But in the future, we would hope that, those perspectives continue to pour in, to just give us a different taste of what the healthcare system and the pharmacy profession tastes and feel like, when you are the person that you are, with the lived experiences that you have. With that, Siva, if you could also share your example, because I know this one is something that really hits home for a lot of us.
Yeah, this was particularly traumatic for a patient of mine. And again, it's from community practice. And again, it goes to depth, like Jefferson sort of alluded to, and understanding our patients, right? That understanding is really critical. So I want to preface this by saying that the peers that have devoted their time to raising awareness of gender minority focused care in the pharmacy profession, they deserve a lot of recognition. They really fill the gap in knowledge that is so critical to many of our patients. And I'm going to speak for myself, I was ignorant to the gravity of much of the clinical practice and motivational interviewing issues that affect appropriate care. And again, implore fellow pharmacists and pharmacy technician peers, and even lay staff, to keep identifying ways to improve care for gender minority patients. So this is an example of Robert, who became Roberta. You can see that the prescription profile includes some feminizing hormones. I'm the full-time community pharmacist there. I've seen Roberta transition from Robert. Very, very emotional transition. This is a huge decision for our patients that go through these transitions. And it was a privilege to be able to support her through it as part of the healthcare team. They come in on a Saturday night to pick up the prescription, and the pharmacist says there's a prescription ready for Robert. And then they share with me on Monday when I'm in again how distressing it is. And I just want to sort of convey to the peers on the call as well, this is very distressing to be misgendered. For someone who's gone through a transition like this, it's taken a lot of courage and a lot of determination, and it can be distressing. So it's unfortunate, and it could have been avoided either by our staff using the software system we had more effectively, or it could have been a situation where the software system doesn't support incorporating those transition names in there. Because sometimes, Jefferson, you might not be aware, but they may not have updated their health card or their insurance information, which may have had the old one. So I think these situations can be avoided, and I think it's important to highlight that, just to provide appropriate care.
Thank you, Siva, for sharing that. And as I was reflecting on this example, I couldn't help but think about the first year that I started practicing as a licensed pharmacist. This was 2013. We're talking here. And I actually had to support a patient who was, going through that transition, and I felt clueless. I had no idea how to support. There was nothing to help me, kind of even, what do I even say? Or, how do I make sure that this patient feels comfortable? And I remember the challenge was not only just the emotional part, because, I'm also trying to make sure that the patient is, well supported, but I didn't even know how to support the patient. And two, our systems, just like you mentioned, like I didn't know, what do I do now with the name on the file? Do I just go in and change the name altogether? What do I do? Like, I'm really hoping that these conversations will lead to policy changes and will lead to making sure that we have SOPs in place to help make sure that our technologies are able to, support the various needs, but also be able to make sure that we're having these conversations and not trigger the patient, especially when they're going through such emotional experiences. So thank you very much for sharing that. And keeping with time in mind, I will move on to our next terminology in the EDI is inclusion. And Jefferson, if you could kind of, if you were to describe inclusion, what would that be for you?
Sure. I just want to quickly acknowledge, though, 30 seconds, not even. Elena has pointed out, and Elena's absolutely right here, in terms of the case that was just brought up,
okay.
That it should be described as Roberta, transgendered patient, instead of using their dead name. Very valid point, Elena. I just wanted to acknowledge that, and that was one of the questions that came in. Inclusion. So inclusion is really a sense of belonging, of feeling you have your voices being heard within an organization, a group of people, what have you. For me personally, one of my favorite analogies of inclusion comes courtesy of Nina Simon. She's the former executive director of the Santa Cruz Museum. Now, she talks about inclusion within an organizational lens and how inclusion is really about hanging as many welcome signs within your organization as possible, then asking yourselves which not welcome signs remain. Siva brought up a very excellent example at the beginning about having someone who speaks Spanish. We live in a country, Canada. We are a bilingual, legally, we are a bilingual country. And anywhere in this country, if someone says, I request to be served in French, we have to accommodate that. So to go back to inclusion, in terms of this case that Siva brought up, that's a great case with respect to language. Because we're such a multi-ethnic country, I mean, it's my understanding there's something like 98 languages. I don't have that stat, so I shouldn't probably even use that. But 98 wouldn't surprise me. Frankly, I suspect it's more when you factor in more indigenous languages and whatnot as well. But there are probably hundreds of languages spoken in this country. Admittedly, not everywhere. So going back to that definition of inclusion, if your pharmacy is, say, in a location, maybe it's more of an Italian neighborhood, or maybe it's an Italian-Hungarian neighborhood, maybe it's a Southeast Asian, Caribbean neighborhood, or what have you. So do you have someone on staff who can actually speak with the people who are in that neighborhood? And that's where we go back to look at inclusion, and frankly, that layers on that equity equality lens. Because let's say in Siva's practice, you know what, we need someone who speaks Spanish, English, and Punjabi. I'm just throwing that out as an example. And let's say in your practice, you need someone who speaks maybe Ukrainian, French, and English. And maybe some Jamaican patois, I don't know. And that's where we look at inclusion. So I love her analogy. It's about hanging as many welcome signs as possible, and then asking yourselves which not welcome signs remain. And that's going to differ from location to location.
Got it.
I mean, I'm just using language as one example. It could be things like, oh, do you have to walk up some stairs, and someone who may not be able to handle stairs or what have you. Or maybe it's something, well, we're only open from 9 to 12 p.m., 9 a.m. to 12 p.m. What about people who are working during those hours? Can they access for their prescriptions, et cetera, et cetera?
Right. Thank you. Thank you, Jefferson. And Siva.
Yeah, so you know what? Again, because I'm an IPG, I thought we could talk about inclusion in that context. You know, as we know, 43% of pharmacists in Ontario are internationally educated, right? Yeah. And we think about pharmacy as a profession. In the truest sense of the word, we recognize that there's an element of fraternity to being part of the profession. And the data shows that almost half of our fraternity come from outside Canada, and myself as an example. I just wanted to share that my local association, the Hamilton District Pharmacists Association, has been instrumental in me feeling accepted as a foreign pharmacist. That is as qualified as someone who went to school in Canada. So when I first came to Canada, I'll be honest with you, I felt that I wasn't not worthy to practice here, but I didn't feel that I was as qualified as perhaps domestic graduates. That's how I felt. So I'm just going to share that with you. That's gone now, though, because I know it's something felt by fellow IPGs, and I think I'm cognizant of that when I'm a mentor to IPG. So I mentor students and interns from the UFT, Waterloo, and overseas graduates. I think it's really, really important to recognize that from an inclusivity lens. I think particularly in community pharmacies, IPGs need that sense of community within the profession, because when they first arrive and start practicing, I think there's a real risk that they may feel less included, potentially for their whole careers, because we know how community pharmacy is. Often we practice alone without peers. And another perspective that I wanted to share with fellow international pharmacy graduates as well. So I really wanted to serve on the board of the college. It's something I really wanted to do. As a community pharmacist, I felt really motivated to be on the board and be involved in those decisions that affected pharmacy practice for the betterment of patients. So inclusivity came into it, and I was honestly shocked to get elected. But it just goes to show fellow IPGs that inclusivity is present, right? Yeah. We've got many allies, we've got many peers that they don't even ask where you went to school. So I think we just need to build on that momentum and make our profession stronger in that regard.
Well, Siva, from a D&I lens as well, and just, I mean, the term that you're talking about for that feeling you had of not feeling good enough or qualified enough, that's known as imposter syndrome.
Definitely feel that,
sort of D&I and also mental health space.
I think a lot of international pharmacy graduates, Jefferson, feel that way, and rightly or wrongly so. Yeah, it's definitely real.
It's not just with international pharmacists. It happens in a lot of, I mean, I felt that way myself when, I mean, people have said, oh, you only got this role because you're Black or you're gay or what have you, versus I hired you because of your qualifications. And unfortunately, that's another way we see white supremacy basically rearing its ugly head. And it doesn't benefit anyone, not even white people, frankly.
Agreed. I mean, you know, like, so true. I think the imposter syndrome is something when I feel it, you know, so many times. And I think the intersections Siva and I have in terms of our career, I was Canadian trained, so that's a different, but there's different intersections that we kind of all are at in terms of, like, you know, the different lived experiences and perspectives we bring to this table. It's always very interesting, you know, when we have these conversations and we reflect on it, and then it's like you have these aha moments. It's like, I'm not the only one, you know, I'm not the only one who's feeling like this. And I think this is the purpose of these dialogues, is we want to make sure we raise that awareness and hopefully build that network and that mentorship, so that, you know, if somebody wants to pursue something in their career, regardless of, you know, what their journey has been like, they have that chance to, you know. And I think just to kind of support what Siva had mentioned, OPA was one of the first ones to actually have a diversity task force. This was started right in the pandemic. I was part of it in the inaugural year of that task force. And I remember we did a survey actually to understand, you know, what is our profession, how inclusive it is, what are some of the challenges or barriers. And 65% of the profession, at least in Ontario, considered the profession to be inclusive. 76% felt like they were comfortable expressing their identity amongst their peers. And about 78% felt safe being themselves amongst their pharmacy peers. What I would love to see moving into the future is, you know, how do patients feel when they go into pharmacies? Do they feel that safe feeling, that welcome feeling? As Jefferson mentioned, inclusivity is all about, you know, looking at putting as many welcome signs and then seeing what you don't have. So it's like, you know, maybe this is an exercise we need to do as a profession, is to also understand how our patients, who are consumers of our services, see, you know, how inclusive we are in terms of addressing their needs. With that said, I think my next, okay, sorry, I had a little blur there. That said, I think one of the other terms that we also wanted to talk about, because this is something also that very commonly gets brought up, is microaggressions. You know, what is microaggressions, and, you know, how do they show up in healthcare settings, or some examples that you can draw upon? And I'll leave it to Siva and Jefferson, you know, to kind of take this forward for us.
Yeah. Do you want to go to the next slide? Because I've got examples there, right? Yeah. So again, I'm in no way a DEI expert, right? But, you know, I pray every day, right? And I've been asked thousands of times by my patients, what's that on your forehead, right? And Beams was an amazing community. I've never once felt or perceived microaggressions in this regard, because I really felt a sense of sincerity when I was asked that. I can see how some might feel that way, But maybe I'm just naive to my personal belief. But one thing I did want to share is that female colleagues who wear the hijab or scarf, I really do see that section of our profession sometimes targeted quite frequently. And I feel that I see Islamophobia as something that's frequent in both countries that I practiced in the UK and Canada. I worked in a largely Jewish area of London, and you can see someone with that religious hat on their head. I've seen it there as well. And anti-Semitism and Islamophobia, they're cultural evils that are unfortunately present. And I think continuous awareness and action in this regard is needed to overcome it. I just wanted to highlight those two examples there. And I don't know what Jefferson thinks. What if you were in my position? Would you perceive that as a microaggression? If someone said, "What's that on your forehead?" in a nice way.
Again, context is everything, Siva. It depends on you, your person. And frankly, a lot of it could also depend on the type of day you're even having. And how it's said. Like, for example, I often get, for me, microaggression I often receive is, "You are so well spoken and eloquent," and I'm like, "What did you expect?"
Yeah.
I delivered a training course for a client once, and I mean, because often I used to get that a lot growing up. My mother was a school teacher from the island of Bermuda, very British. Other issues there in terms of colonialism, but she always made sure that my pronunciation was very proper. And frankly, Siva, I don't know if you're seeing it or not, but I'm sure to you I have a Canadian accent. But I know a lot of times when I'm traveling in the US, for example, people often think I'm British versus Canadian. Because
I've seen it come out in what you say.
Canadian or British?
Both. The British comes through.
Anyways, where I'm going with this is, so a lot of times, because like you're so well spoken, you're so eloquent, you're so this, you're so that. I'm just also quite studious. I'm very good with English from that standpoint. Anyways, going back to my initial point, I delivered a session for one of my clients at the Stratford Festival. And afterwards, a woman came up to me and said, and here's a great example in terms of microaggression or not microaggression. She said to me, "Oh my goodness, you are so eloquent, you're so well spoken." And I gotta be honest, if she had stopped there, I'd be like, "Well, what were you expecting?" But then she went on to say, "You're an amazing public speaker. I just get so nervous if there's more than 4 people in a group, I just can't talk in front of them. Like, I admire what you do." In that case, I'm like, okay, not a microaggression. She just qualified it by saying, "Look, I can't do that. Like, I cannot speak to more than 4 people in a group. What you're doing is amazing. Wow." Versus stopping there. So let's go back to its context. I think you have a little video that this is one of the videos I use in my training that speaks to different forms of microaggressions.
Thank you, Jefferson. I think in the interest of time, I will leave this video. So we'll have this in the slide deck, and we'll allow the audience to view it at their own time. But if you were to, let's say, wrap up microaggressions in terms of a quick definition, or if you were to define it, how would you define it?
As Siva had pointed out already, just little sort of terminology. I mean, it's not always just verbal. They can be physical. Black folk, especially Black women. When non-Black people just go up and touch the hair. It's like,
yeah.
Like if I went up to you and I met you in person and I just touched your hair, would you be like, "Whoa, like, you're not my hairdresser, like, stay away, you're not my mother, you're not my hairdresser." Like, something like that is a microaggression. It's like, why do you feel you can come and touch my hair, but I wouldn't do that to you?
Agreed.
Just something even as simple for the women in the audience. "Oh, so when do you plan to have a child? When do you plan to have a baby?" Like little things like that. It's like sometimes it's words, sometimes it's actions. As a gay man, often it's like, "Oh my God, I had no idea you were gay. Do you know so-and-so?" And it's like, "Well, I haven't seen him at the last meetings." Like one thing, here's another example. Black people, a lot of people think all Black people know each other, I'm related.
Yes.
I'm at the airport with a friend, picking up a friend from the airport. Ironically, my family just happened to be coming back, I didn't know, from a cruise. I'm from Bermuda. And so I go and I see, it's like, oh, that's a lot of Black people from a flight from Vancouver. You don't expect a lot of Black folk. And then as I'm watching, I'm like, "Oh my God, that's my family." And then my friend, he's white, he's like, "Oh, so it's true, all Black people are related." In that case, I mean, I didn't take it as a microaggression, because in this case, it's like, well, I am related to them. But if it was just a bunch of Black folk I wasn't related to, yes, microaggression. In this case,
Right.
no, it was frankly a joke.
Right.
I laughed at it because they're like, oh, are you here to pick us up? No.
I think it's the
Sometimes it
intention.
could be actions, it could be words, it could be slights that people say, oh, well, I meant it as a compliment.
Got it. Thank you. And I think it's also like, part of it is, and again, this is speaking from my own experience as well. Sometimes it's not even that you intend to come across as, a microaggressor, if that's even a word. But I know unconscious bias also has a role to play in this because, we all have our own set of assumptions. We all have our own set of hidden biases that, we kind of pick up as we grow in life and the experiences that we have. And sometimes these are intentional, unintentional, and that's where unconscious bias kind of comes into play. Jefferson, did you want to speak about this quickly, and then I can ask Siva to also share an example with us afterwards.
So I mean, I think you've covered it in terms, in the interest of time, in the terms of the definition. That said, a lot of times when we talk about unconscious bias, I'm getting a little too academic and we have some time here. We're running out of time. I think we're just going to stick with your definition here.
Okay.
One thing I would like to, though,
yes,
going back very quickly to microaggressions, a lot of times when microaggressions happen, you can see the image there of mosquitoes. The analogy that they use in this video is think of microaggressions as mosquito bites, because someone might say, well, someone says to you, so Jefferson, oh, you're quite eloquent, like, okay, like water off a duck's back, like, why do you get upset about it? And I mean, in this video, they talk about how microaggressions, like, okay, you're right, they're small, but like a mosquito bite, if you get so many of them constantly, it's annoying. And that's why I was saying, going back to that context with Siva's example, let's say that was the 20th person who asked you. By the 20th, the first couple of times, you're like, yeah, it's part of my religion, blah, blah, blah. But then by the 20th time, you're like, oh, like you just get annoyed by it because it's like, why do I have to keep bringing this up? Yeah. And that's why some people do get upset with microaggressions, because not everyone experiences them as often. Like we all experience microaggressions, but not everyone experiences them to the rate at different groups do. Right. So that's all. Then to go tie that back into unconscious bias, a lot of times when they see, so for example, I've often been called an angry Black man, or we see angry Black woman, a lot of times based on our reactions to microaggressions, which ties into unconscious bias, because really what's happening there is you're confirming now through that action, we're confirming a belief system that, oh, Black people are angry. Yeah. But they're not necessarily making the connection of, oh, this person who happens to be Black is angry because for the 7th time today, some stranger went up and touched her hair. And she is just not having any more of it. So now suddenly someone who sees that's like, oh, well, that just confirms that all Black people are angry without actually taking a look, which goes back to that unconscious bias piece.
So true. It's that rapid decision making and making assumptions, that quick assumptions that we make. It's kind of where we fall into the trap of unconscious bias. Siva, I know you have an example to share, so I'll quickly pass it over to you.
Yeah, for sure. I'll try and be brief. I learned a lot there from what Jefferson said. So this is another encounter I experienced in community pharmacy that I thought there was an element of unconscious bias there. Chiamaka here, a patient of Nigerian descent, relatively new Canadian. So diversity, like I said, it's the sense of recognizing different cultures, and in this approach here, it's in the case of maternal health. So this is not the first instance where a pregnant mother might be apprehensive to inject in the preferred site of insulin administration, the abdomen, right? They can often feel that they're injecting medicines directly to the unborn child. So this patient has gestational diabetes. She's 33 years old. There's a script for Levemir that's picked up by her husband, and we give full counseling to the husband. But then the pharmacist on shift that day books a med review on a Sunday when I'm on shift. So I just re-review everything with them and realize that she's injecting into the deltoid, right? Which is, it can have some pretty dangerous effects on mother and baby. Yes. So these kinds of things we always share as a pharmacy team, at least in community practice. And I think when I shared it with my colleagues, I felt that there may have been a lack of appreciation or empathy of this patient because they didn't grow up here. Right? So in this case, I was born in Sri Lanka. I'm deeply rooted in the Sri Lankan community, even here in Canada. So I've seen this before. I recognize these feelings about protecting an unborn child. Even though it's not very accurate, it's still very real to this patient. And in that same, I didn't get that same sense of perspective from some of the other peers that I shared it with. And this isn't about discrimination, but it's about cultural awareness and how that plays a role in the kind of depth of empathy we can provide to our patients. And that's something I wanted to share with you.
Thank you. No, I think that's actually a very good example in terms of highlighting unconscious bias, right? And I think given Canada, the diversity that it has in terms of like, how many, we are such a diverse country and such a diverse province, it becomes that much more our responsibility as well as healthcare providers to try to understand, as Jefferson mentioned, like, try to understand the community that you're serving. What are the needs of that community? How can you relate to the community and the culture, that the community has, or that form their current perceptions. I just want to have a couple of tools.
I know we're pressed for time. I apologize, Siva. I don't want to. I loved your example, but I would disagree with you. I would actually say that is an example of discrimination. Now, when I say that, meaning systemic discrimination due to an unconscious bias, I'm not saying that the person was down outright, but I mean, that speaks to systemic issues that can cause discrimination or what have you.
Got it.
So I would say I would actually disagree with it. I would call that discrimination more from a systemic lens by the sounds of what you described, if I understood you correctly in terms of the technical piece there.
It was interesting because I was thinking more on the awareness side, but again, Jefferson, you are the EDI expert, or DNI expert, so we'll leave it with you. But obviously, I think it was all the loopholes that perfectly aligned for that to happen, right?
But that's what these systemic issues are. You're looking at those loopholes,
right?
Because we're making certain assumptions about certain cultures, certain people, certain based on our own, going back to unconscious bias. And that's where a lot of these systemic, that's why I say it's systemic. It might not be necessarily intention. Like, that's not, when you're in this space, there's intent versus impact.
Right.
The intention was not to hurt you. However, the impact of my words or my actions have in essence hurt you.
Right. Got it. Thank you.
Excuse me for one moment. I do have to take.
No worries. And I think just to kind of, as we are wrapping up this conversation, awareness is always very important in recognizing unconscious bias. And so just to highlight some tools, the implicit association test developed by Harvard University is one of the greatest, it's a really good test if you're looking to kind of uncover your own blind spots. It really, the way it's able to measure or indicate or provide you with that feedback is it measures the speed and accuracy with which, you're responding to the categorizing words or images that are popping up in the test. And that kind of helps you, and the time it takes for you to answer those questions. That's really how the test is measured, to help you recognize, where your own blind spots may be. And they have multiple different tests for, several factors. So I would encourage you to check that out. Also, the C-Bias Block Bias Toolkit that's developed by Stanford is also a great resource if you are ever looking to implement any solutions or some practice resources for you or yourself and your team. And moving forward, Jefferson, I'm going to look at you, in terms of how do we promote that allyship and empathy as we're wrapping up this conversation, to kind of get the ball rolling, or if you have a team that's brand new to this concept, what are some key strategies or initiatives that you can do to implement this work? Oh, you're on mute, Jefferson.
There we go. So my company is called Breakfast Culture, and our brand promise is we inspire empathy in business. At the end of the day, a lot of this work in the D&I space is about empathy. Part of that empathy is being an ally. So Siva I loved all of Siva's examples today, because he's talking about how he has been able to be an ally within the pharmacy profession. And when you start doing this work, you really need to do a lot of work in terms of your internal work and understanding, what are my privileges? Based on my privileges, what power do I have? And then when you start recognize that, to go back to allyship, it's how can I use my power and my privilege and my influence to actually affect change? And I loved all of Siva's examples, because it talked about how, okay, and there are cases where he was in a position of power and privilege to affect this change for his patients. And then there were times where he recognized that, oh, what was that great example around language?
Yep.
In that case, Siva was powerless, did not have the privilege of the Spanish-speaking language, but recognized that the junior person in this case, the student, the third-year student who came in, who I'm not sure what it is like in the pharmacy space, but I know in the engineering space, it's my first degree. It's like, oh, you're a third-year student. What do you know? Wouldn't even talk to us. But in this case, he was recognized that, okay, they're the third-year student. I'm the expert in terms of, I'm the professional in terms of pharmacy, but they speak Spanish and they can help, translate. So in that case, Siva relinquished his power to the third-year student. So when you talk about allyship and empathy, again, that's all it is. It's about empathizing, understanding, trying to see where another person's coming from. And then that allyship, you have to understand your power and your privilege and how you can use that. And sometimes that means sitting down and shutting up.
Yep.
Me, my male privilege, massive. And there's so many times where I'm in a room full of women and I'm like, they don't need my voice. I'm just going to sit down, shut up, and listen.
Yes, so true. That reflection to bring that awareness and making sure that we are able to I think that raising that awareness is critical. And this is just a resource we have left here for you. And in the interest of time, we just wanted to make sure and highlight that, these are tips, only 12 tips, but you don't have to implement every single one of them. Pick the one that resonates the most with you in terms of, where you want to get started. And then you can come back and revisit this as much as you need as you continue into this journey of trying to become more aware of your own, your own thoughts, your beliefs, your biases, and just as you're trying to become an ally and make sure that you're serving your patients and your peers in the best way possible. Similarly, we do have a reflective exercise. If you feel called to, please do check this out. It's a great one to help you kind of, what is consider your skills, knowledge, and awareness to help you in your interactions with others and just trying to, how can you be more inclusive? Just wanted to point out that the image in the background of this slide is a real example of what inclusivity looks like without making it super obvious. As you can tell from the image, there's steps and then there's like, it's a zigzag pattern, but it's actually a Canadian architect named Cornelia Oberlander who designed these stairs around a ramp to address the needs of those who may have accessibility needs as well. And this is what inclusivity, is at the end of the day. Ending off our conversation as I wrap up, thank you, Siva and Jefferson. A great dialogue. I feel like we were rushed on time because we could have talked about this for a couple more hours if we could. But at the same time, this is not the last time we're having this conversation. We will be continuing this as we move forward with a lot more perceptions and opinions. But I also wanted to, just leave you with this quote: it's people will forget what you said. They'll forget what you did, but they'll never forget how you made them feel. And it kind of wraps up the notion of the conversation that we had today. It's all about the intention, the awareness, and the empathy with which we show up to every interaction that we have. And with that, I'll pass it back on to Jen.
Thanks so much, everybody, for sharing. This can be a really vulnerable topic. And, and when we talk about recognizing privilege, I'm sitting here, I'm a white, cisgendered, heterosexual, able-bodied woman. And one of the things I think that, I've been reflecting on as we explore this space and, I've been learning and growing is that people with privilege, when you start to recognize it and look at it, there is a process that you go through where there is, I think you feel some guilt and then you feel defensive-ness. And so how, as people are learning and growing, like how should people approach that? Is it something that you sit with? Like, do you have any tips for, for everybody who's attending tonight, in terms of how to grow and how to deal with those emotions as we go through this?
I assume that's questions for me.
Sure, anyone who wants to take it. Yeah, Jefferson.
So I get that a lot in my practice and the work that I do. And I always tell people, number one, this is a journey. If it were easy, we wouldn't have any of these issues, period. You're going to mess up. You're going to make mistakes. How do you handle them? Siva brought up a number of different examples in terms of where, okay, here's where it could have gone wrong. Here's where it did go wrong. Here's what we did to rectify it. And importantly, what did you learn from that? You are going to feel uncomfortable. You are going to feel angry. You need to sit with that, frankly, and you need to question and start questioning yourself, why am I uncomfortable about this? Why am I angry? May I share a story? I apologize. I think we're officially over, but may I share a quick story along those lines in terms of where I messed up? So years ago, as I was saying, when I was learning about my own male privilege, I thought I was very cognizant of women's issues, very cognizant. And I know maybe 5 years ago, whatever, I was saying all the crap women were putting, this was all pre-Roe versus Wade being overturned. And I had this massive epiphany. I'm like, excuse my language, but women put up with so much crap today. And I was just, I lost it. I was freaking out. And I was talking about it with my sister, my female colleagues. All the women in my life were like, yeah, Jefferson, tell me something I don't know. I'm like, okay, so none of this is really new. Nope, everything you're saying, it's been around. I'm very aware of it. The difference is you were blind to it before. That was my blind spot. For me, that was a massive epiphany. And the reason why I say that for me it was a massive epiphany is in Caribbean culture, we often have very matriarchal cultures. I grew up in an environment that was very cognizant of women. My mother made sure I was cognizant of women's issues. I always thought I was very aware of that, and I didn't realize how truly blind I was, which made me realize that if I am not blind to this, there are other people, well-meaning, I'm going to be blunt from a racism example or from a heteronormative example, there are well-meaning white people, well-meaning straight people who just don't get it either. And jump to, I'm in a meeting, and all the women know exactly where this is going. I'm in a meeting, there's a black woman speaking, and this white guy is not getting what she's saying. And I was like, Roxanne, if I may. As soon as those words came out of my mouth, I know all the women are like, I know where this is going. As soon as those words came out of my mouth, I was like, oh, damn, I'm about to mansplain. And then I said, Roxanne, I'm really sorry for interrupting you. You go ahead. And I sat down. Roxanne didn't come up to me. After the meeting, 3 women came up to me. And they're all like, you're about to mansplain, weren't you? And I was like, yeah, I was. I was like, but you caught yourself. I said, yeah, I did. You sat down. Yep. You shut up. Yep. You let a woman speak. Yeah. Was that so hard? Now, here's the tea, and this is for the men in the room tonight. Frankly, I said to them, you know what? It was hard for me. Mm. It was hard. The reason why it was hard is my intention, we talked about intent versus impact. In this case, my intention was to help Roxanne convey her message. And I realized that I'm not bringing anything new to the conversation. If, for example, I'm sitting in that meeting and I got a new text with some brand new information that she may be unaware of that's affecting what she's stating, in that case, my impact is I am helping you. This just came in. Versus at this point, it's like, no, I am not helping her at all. And that was hard for me to learn and hard for me to accept and understand. And that's why I say, when you are doing this work, to your point, Jen, it is not easy work. And you need to start, there's a lot of reflection, there's a lot of self-reflection. And I mean, that's just one example. Siva brought up a number of really great examples related to your profession. So start thinking when you're in your profession, when you're working with your patients, what assumptions am I making about this person, about a group of people even? Someone might pay with cash or a check. It's like, oh, does that mean that, they're poor or, what have you? It's like, you know what? I forgot my wallet today, so I'm going to use, or I forgot my credit card. I'm using cash, like what have you. Hope that helps to answer your question, Jen.
It does. And I think, one of the other takeaways that, I'm hearing from listening to you all is it's really not like, if I'm here as a learner, it's not about me. Like I have the work to do, but this isn't about me. And, however I'm feeling, it's truly about us and making, us a better, more inclusive, more welcoming space for anyone who occupies it. So I'm really excited. This is a great conversation to start out this learning series. Here at OPA, we are really, really proud to be looking to produce all of these resources for our members to help with your learning journey and to learn along with us. And do want to do a quick shout out, of course, to some of the sessions that we'll have on these topics at our RX Talks event, which is our new revamped Reimagined conference experience. So we have 2 one-day events, one on July 8th and one on July 21st and September 8th. You have up until June 1st to buy the 2-day pass at a discount. So if you haven't purchased your tickets yet, make sure that you do that. The 1-day tickets, if you aren't available one of those days, are available as well too. They're going to be fantastic events. They're all focused on people and giving pharmacy professionals the skills they need to thrive in their professional and personal lives. Everything from system resilience, what we learned from COVID-19, negotiating skills, pharmacist compensation, and a really fantastic debate. It's going to debate different models of how pharmacists should be compensated with expanding scope. talking about pharmacy professionals facing abuse in their practice by patients and how to manage that as a person, mental health, wellness, EDI, leadership, and non-traditional career paths. So it's all focused about you, the people at pharmacy, and we're really excited to see you there. So make sure that you register early because our spots are capped, and we are going to be continuing these conversations both online in our the Right Dose Signature Learning Series, but also in person through events like RX Talks. So I know we're over time, but thank you everyone who's hung out with us. And if you do have colleagues that were interested in the session but couldn't attend live tonight, make sure they know that we have recorded the session and that we'll be making that available through our learning management system and of course on our YouTube channel as well too. So encourage them to check it out and hear what we've had to say this evening. So thank you everyone. Have a great rest of your evening and we'll see you at the next webinar.
Thanks, everyone.
Thanks, guys. Thanks for everything.